Hi there, everybody. My name is James Slusser, and I am here with my very dear friend and amazing, fabulous, I'm going to keep the fuck up, creator of many things, including this series, Rising from the Ashes. And Ashley, why don't you go ahead and tell them why you asked me to interview you, which I'm super excited about, so they kind of get the flavor of what we're looking to really dive into today.
Yeah. Well, when I was creating this series, I wanted to tell people stories, and I realized that I feel like it's really hard for me to tell my own story in a way that's maybe putting it all out there, even the parts that feel really messy or less fun. And I know that you are somebody that will always like, well, I feel like it's such love with you, but
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you're really good at like showing all of those shadow parts and showing all parts of self and really encouraging other people to bring those parts of themselves into the light. And so that's why I chose you, because I feel like I have the easiest time bringing all parts of me to the table when you're here and when we've like done work together and interviews together.
Okay, so I know that like one of your big passions is really helping people like be their full authentic self. And do
Mm-hmm.
you sometimes find yourself falling into the same trappings of like trying to be on all the
Well,
time?
yeah, I think one of the things that people misunderstand with me is they think like I've heard this recently. It's like, "Oh, look at the dancing. You're just like such this like brave expressed soul." And I think that sometimes we forget that I've really had to work hard in this area because I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I've been such a perfectionist, so much like about being a good girl, so much trying to manage how I look to other people at other points in my life, like especially like I feel like my childhood, teens,
Mm-hmm.
20s, parts of my 30s as well, like were very, I feel like, curated. And I think that there's some times where we don't even realize that there's a part of us that doesn't feel true until we go through life. It's been hard for me. And so I still have challenges with it. There's still parts of me that feel tender or hard to talk about. And I don't really know if like that's ever going to change. But my intention is to like share as much as I can of myself, because I feel like having such a curated view of people online is like really, it's like breaking people in some ways. It's fucking them up to just see these like curated people and think that that's like real humans. And so that's like what's important for me about telling my story is to show that like while like sometimes I might just seem like this very free, like happy go lucky person, that I feel like it's because I was so the opposite of that I really had to put a lot of attention and love into myself and still have to continue to do that work in order to feel like free to be joyful within myself and to like express that way in the world.
Okay, so we're gonna get into some yummy, meaty questions. Okay, good.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. You a little scared?
Yes.
You should be.
Yes.
Good, good. Well, I just wanted to, because you brought it up, and I've known you for so long now. Like we're on the other interview, we're talking about like how long it's been. We're like coming up on 20 years. It's gonna be our magical anniversary, and I've really seen you go from that young girl that did always have to like have it all together, or the persona of having it all together. And I know
Mm.
these last couple years you've really unpacked how like your childhood and your family dynamic kind of cultivated that need to be like the perfect girl. So, what do you think has been the most revealing things about really understanding your family dynamic?
Mm. Yeah, we were talking a lot about this
Mm.
recently on your interview, and kind of how I feel that my view of like my family members and kind of how I view my childhood and my relationships with my parents, I feel specifically, it's shifted and changed a lot, but it's in different places. I feel like the healing with my mom has actually been really big because there's been like I've really kind of like I think noticed how precious those relationships are, and I've really tried to take on responsibility to show up differently, because I think before, like how we were talking about in your interview, I was like, you did this to me, or you treated me this way, and it's like your fault, right? And I think that that was a part of the journey, and I feel like I realized that I was really treating my family, my parents, like almost in a way that was kind of, what would I say, not my most like best loving self. Like, because I felt angry. I felt like, you're the parent. Like, you need to like be the parent and parent me. I'm the kid. And I felt like I was in this like tug of war energy with them. And so at some point in the healing, I felt like, okay, I can see that like I am not bringing my best to this. I'm not bringing the love that I am in other parts of my life and other relationships to strangers, to my family, and that if anything's going to change, I'm going to have to just be the one that shows up different. And does that mean that like I don't regret at times during my divorce, for instance, setting boundaries or keeping certain family members that didn't feel like it was right for me at that time? Like I don't regret that at all, but I do feel like now I'm in a place of really trying to come into healing, take responsibility for what I can. I feel like I have so much more compassion for my parents, like after going through my divorce and being able to see that love in them. But like my perspective as a child was different. Like perspective as child Ashley is like, I'm too much, I'm too this, I'm too that, like, and I can still sometimes look back at videos of me when I'm like a little kid and see people like always trying to clean me up quickly and being like, don't get messy, don't do that, stop asking so many questions. And so I can see how I've gotten those narratives because that was my experience, you know?
Well, that brings me up to, I wanted to talk to you about this because I noticed this from knowing you in a professional environment when we first came together. There's always this stout need to be perfect or perfectionism.
Yeah. Well, professional, I think, is a part of that as well, right? Because like, I do feel like there, like, even before I had a business, I feel like that perfectionist was there, and I do feel like it was my way of trying to control things. And I love how Brene Brown talks about perfectionism being this like 20-ton shield that we kind of use to shield the world from like really seeing us or having anything that they might say to criticize us. And so that was part of my like victim story, was like that, you know, I think a part of it was identity, of being like this good girl, like great student who was like really trying to kind of maintain this identity, and how I've really gotten praise in my life. But also I feel like it was very much in the beginning feeling like I wasn't worthy as a business owner. I'm going on, this is year 9 for me. And I remember in the beginning feeling like I had to very much earn like, or really prove my worth to other people in order to get hired. And so that's, I think, why a lot of times like I am so free and so colorful, and I really help people with that, is like my big journey has been like knowing that me as me has worth, and that's really where the magic is. And that's why I'm always talking about lead with your magic, is like I felt like in an effort to try to curate and be for everybody, I really covered that up.
Okay.
A lot.
Well, I'm going to ask you something kind of hard, but you've talked about it on our old podcast before, and I know that you're pretty open about it, but I think this kind of informs like your drive to like be perfect and the good girl.
Yeah.
And the sexual assault, like when you were in college, like, and the need to kind of like glaze over that to remain like perfect or like the good girl. And I think it really informed me in the last few years about how we can do so much damage to ourselves when we try to hop skip over something.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting because I feel like I've been processing that assault in different ways, because I feel like I've done a lot of healing with the masculine, like with Craig, and that I think that it's odd how sometimes like if it happened to be like a male that was like involved in something, how sometimes we have this like wound with the world, and it's like shows up everywhere. So I feel like I think what you're talking about is how I felt like I didn't want to
like
talk about it,
address
right?
it, right? Like, because it almost felt like
Well,
Like it broke your perfect girl
I
persona.
didn't like report it
Mm-hmm.
because I felt like I was basically like told that I was just going to be seen as this slut or whatever else, and that was like the last thing I wanted to be seen. That was in my shadow.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be seen as this good girl, and if there was anything that's coming up that was counter to that, I was like there's no way. Like that was like my worst nightmare,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I realized though that like years later that parts of me were still like carrying that around. Like I think that there's were parts of me that were afraid to like really be in my body and my sexuality because I felt like it was dangerous in some capacity, or parts of me that felt like even though it doesn't make sense on a conscious level, I do feel like there's parts of me that feel unsafe in the world, almost like a little girl, that it's like if I'm get my following too big, because like I've noticed like there's has been a pattern where sometimes things might get going but then someone talks some shit back on the internet and I kind of have like retracted a bit because it can be scary, and I really realized that there was these young like scared parts of me that I feel like tied back to that and other moments that were very afraid to like be seen and to like let people truly see me. And so that I feel like has been a lot of healing within myself, with my own body, with like being able to own those parts of my shadow and to feel okay with like talking about it and to letting it be in the light like it is now.
And I think I really witnessed you like in the first iteration of the Ashley I met, trying to like make all like the safe choices, like the proper choices, like be it like career, be it with like the person you're gonna be with. Um, when do you think that started to crack? Like that need to be like make the right choices and like versus like
Hmm.
your most authentic choice, because you've really stepped into your most authentic self these last few years. Like when was did you first notice like fuck, I kind of need to break away from like the right choices, the perfect choices? Because I think a lot of
Hmm.
people that come to you for like your business savvy, they're stuck on that like, oh, I have to, like we've been talking about, a lot of people that are healers will become nurses or like in the medical field because it's like the correct choice to make.
Yeah.
When do you think you started to veer off from that?
It was definitely after I had my kids,
Mm-hmm.
and I almost think a part of it was that I like had decided that I was not going to just like fully just like lose myself and all parts of me in motherhood, because I there's like I had a business. I had things that I wanted to do and I wanted to create that felt important to me, and I feel like I was like kind of just barely like getting on my spiritual path before I had Jude, almost 8 years ago. And I felt like it was like, I honestly, I think like it, I kind of had like a little bit of a taste of it. You know, I probably had like some Reiki one, was kind of like dabbling in my spiritual curiosities and metaphysical curiosities and going to like, spiritual development stuff. But it was kind of like just something I did. It wasn't really something that I feel like I talked about. Like it was just kind of something that I was curious about at that time. And I remember getting a reading. So this would have probably been probably close to 10 years ago. And I think that there was a part of me that knew that I was going to be entering on this path, because I felt like in that reading I was asking the reader like about my now ex-husband, who was like, I think we were probably, I don't know, either engaged or just like I don't even think we were married yet. But I remember asking this reader ab- about how that was going to be for me, like in my relationship, like with the things that I'm into. And she was like telling me, like, I was sitting there telling her that I think my like purpose is to own a coffee shop. Because it really made sense for me, because I had restaurant management experience and a coffee shop's just in the morning, so like it just makes sense. It's like lower like maintenance and like that to me. And she was like, I don't think that I'm not really feeling connected to that. And she's like, I actually see that you're going to be doing something kind of like me but in your own way. And I was like,
It kind of blew up your safe
well,
plan,
I was like,
right?
I was like, that sounds really interesting. But like, I don't have gifts like you. I don't do
Mm,
anything like that you do. Like I'm like, while I wasn't like opposed to that, like I just, there's no way in my mind that I could perceive that reality for myself. And I know this too, because like I've seen, like I've given readings to people that end up in these different places where at the time they're like, I'm not sure, that doesn't connect, and it pans out that way, you know? So I had that moment, and I feel like I remember asking, like, okay, but what about like my partner? And I was like, I was very concerned at the time. I was like, how is this going to be like for him? So even I feel like at that time there was this voice inside of me that's like, that kind of knew that I was going to be doing something different, and I had this concern of this like partner of how is this going to be? Because I feel like I went shortly after we got married, like, because I did like the hypno babies thing, I did the self hypnosis childbirth. I think that kind of deepened my
mm,
spirituality at that time, my connection with my body, and then pop out this baby, and then I feel like I'm like obsessed with spirituality, trying to talk to him about everything I learned in psychic
yeah.
development, about aliens. And I remember him just being like, whoa, this is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I don't mind hearing about some of this stuff, but this is a lot. And I think that that was kind of when I was like, well, trying to navigate, like, how do I have this part of my life? Because I certainly didn't slow down exploring that stuff, but like I kind of had to realize that like within the marriage that I was in at the time, that was like not really a common or shared interest. I was lucky to have friends and people like you in my life that I feel like we could really indulge in those topics and encourage each other to be our weird selves. But like it did feel like I mean, I feel, oh, got back from Sedona as well.
Mm.
That was another thing. I got back from my honeymoon, left for Sedona, and then had this like spiritual experience in Sedona. And the shaman was like, I'm like, I don't know about this stuff. This is my first time. And he's like, this isn't your first time. You're remembering. And I was like, okay, you know. I was just kind of going along with a friend, but then actually not realizing that was going to be a shift. So that was like all, I guess that was even before I had you, but it was shortly, like right after I got married. And I feel like it was kind of like, who is this woman that I married? And then a few weeks later, I quit my job unexpectedly to start my business with no prior conversation with the person that I just got married to. Because I got amped up in the car singing a Wicked song, truth be told, defying gravity. And I was like, yes, okay, if I don't like what she's saying, I was like, out. But can you see how that would be kind of challenging? Like, of course, like if you live with a partner, they would want you to have a conversation with them, but I was just like really trusting my soul at that point.
Well, I just want to point out this is one of the many reasons that I believe you are a gay man stuck in a woman's body, because you had like this like ultimate moment with a Wicked song to really realize who you were. But I did want to
My
talk.
life is like a musical a little bit.
I did want to talk to you about, like, we've always talked a lot about coming like out of the spiritual closet,
Yeah.
and like people really owning who they are in those weird parts. But you like were in a marriage where that didn't fit the puzzle you guys have put together. So do you want to talk a little bit about like the loneliness and like getting through that, like when you're with, it can not even just a husband, like a community, or being around people that like don't get you or kind of want you to suppress who you truly were, and how you got through that, because that was a lot.
It's a lot. And I do feel for like my ex-husband in that I feel like I did change a lot, rightfully so. Like I was a very different woman than who he had met, and it was a pretty rapid switch. So like I can't really blame that somebody, you know what I mean? Like it was not necessarily what he signed up for. But then I kind of felt like we had one kid and then a second that kind of followed, not that far after. And so I kind of felt like I was so wrapped up in the family dynamic of it that I felt like I don't know, it almost reminds me of like the plate, like the cafeteria plate. I just had different parts of my life. And for me at that time, honestly, I was like, this is probably how most marriages are. This is how marriage is. This is just how relationships are. And I mean, I was kind of like, I feel like just trying to basically go find time on my own to go explore that and to choose what I wanted. And yeah, I mean, I almost feel like I almost didn't know any better though at the same time. It's not like I had like I've seen all of these relationships that are like the one that I have now with my current partner. Like I didn't have an example of that. So it was almost like just like regular, like normal for me. Like this is just what it is.
Okay. So, like, how do you think that you move? Because, again, this is where we see a lot of people that have such great gifts and, like, such a calling to, like, spirituality. How do you think you move through, like, that fear that, like, keeps most people tied to, like, safety? Because I really watched you over, like, since I got sober, like, 7 years, like, pull away from safety and get into your most authentic self. Do you have any tidbits or anything that really helps you move from safety to where you are now? Because I mean, that divorce and like the financial responsibility and raising 2 kids and being a single mom, like how do you help other women or men that are like trapped in that same scenario?
Well, I feel like I think that like the journey that I've been on, like you were saying, it does feel like it happened over like in phases, like over time. I feel like leading up to the divorce, I was like really just like learning about Carolyn Elliott and existential kink and like really getting in. Like, I feel like, shadow work is something that like you like know about it until like there's like the right person or the right author that it really like resonates with you, or it's like really your time to like do that work. And I feel like that's what her work was for me. It was like really like the right person, the right message at the right time. And I think that I started to do the deepest fear inventories that she was talking about. I feel like my meditation practice at that point in life, like pre-divorce, was probably less than it is now, because I've realized that like this is an important structure for me, especially like as a single parent. It was like I realized like how much I need to take care of myself, and I felt like it was easier for me to get away with like not doing that as much in my marriage. But I feel like the deepest fear inventories, like I think first off had me look at the fact that I had a big fear that if I went full all out with who I am, that was going to destroy my marriage, that it was going to explode it. And so I think at one point I had to come to an understanding that like, and choose myself and be like, okay, well, I choose myself. This is my path. And if that's going to be what happens, like I felt like I had to come into an acceptance that was what was meant to happen, that it was meant to be here for a season, but not necessarily a lifetime. And so I think it really started with that, of like really looking at what was in my subconscious, what my fear was, and being able to consciously look at that and say, okay, well, I'm gonna choose myself here, and we'll take this one step at a time. And then I think, I mean, in terms of leaving the marriage and all of that, because as you know, there was a lot of couples therapy, there was a lot of, it's not like it just happened like that. It really happened over time and a lot of consideration. But I feel like leaving the marriage was also about choosing myself and knowing that I was not happy in the marriage that I was in, that it was no longer right for me, and that even though I knew that it was going to be scary and I had no answer of what I was going to do next, that it was worth doing it and investing in my life for the long run, investing in the kind of mother that I want to be for my children and the person I want to be in the world. And I also feel like it's at that point when everything else is just pretty much, you've blown up your life, you're kind of like, well, what else is there? We're just going to come out with it all at this point, you know?
Well, do you feel like in that time when the explosion happened that there was any, I know you mentioned meditation, there was anything that was really keeping you fucking sane, because that was an insane time. Is there any other kind of work or
Weed and dancing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the weed thing, like, I feel like I do always, like, I like talking about things with you because I'm always trying to, like, have, like, intentional, like, relationships with things, or to notice if, like, I'm leaning on something. Because during my divorce specifically, there were times where I smoked a lot of weed because I was falling apart. Like, I was crying throughout the day. I was, like, kind of suddenly, like, I think just to give a little perspective, I live in Orange County, California. I wanted to live in a neighborhood that felt really safe for me. So I kind of leapt into this apartment here, which I love. And it's my third, like, lease here. But, like, I did not know how I was going to pay for this place. And $3,400 is a lot to pay. And when the last time I was living on my own, I maybe had a roommate. Maybe it was like $900, $1,000 or something. So for me, it was like, it was absolutely terrifying to be taking on that kind of financial responsibility at a time when, like, a lot of my energy was going towards, like, my children and, like, growing them and nursing them and kind of, like, operating at, like, partial, like, capacity. I was like, I had like 20 hours a week I would work in my business, and my son is on the spectrum, and so he, let's see, I believe Sage was 2. Sage turned 2 the day after we decided to get divorced. It was her birthday.
Oh, must have been a fun party.
Yeah, like, and none of the family knew yet, so we're, like, still keeping our rings on until we can decide how we're gonna tell the family and everything. And then, so my son would have been, I believe, like 4 going on 5, and so that's, like, a lot of people know that have a kid with autism that between 3 and 6 is, like, pretty at some challenging years. And so I felt like it was way too much. Like, it was just way too much, and there was just so much surrender and, like, fear, and just, for me, like, the dancing was something that started when I had not moved out of the house yet with my ex-husband, and I would still need to show up. It's not like, I like to talk about how when these life-altering events happen, it's not like life just stops or you don't owe your bills anymore. It's usually not that way. And so, of course, like, I'm like, I need to be financially responsible. I need to find a way to show up. And so that's when I'd go into the garage. I would kind of use, like, my playlist. It was, like, on Spotify at the time, almost like an oracle deck. And I'd be like, show me, like, what I need to feel. Like, just lead me on this journey. And I would dance like a wild woman to these random songs that would come on. It would always be hitting on this, like, specific emotion. And I would either get angry or I would cry. And I would just, like, basically, like how a lot of therapists will say with, like, grief, to, like, set that time aside to, like, cry and look at the pictures. That was, like, my way of doing that, but, like, not letting it get fucking stuck in the body, so I could actually really, like, honor myself and clear my system and still actually be available to show up for other people, at least at the capacity. I felt like I luckily was, like, not overworked at that point, so it wasn't insanity. But yes, like, I feel like the weed helped me, like, get through some of the toughest days, and I feel like that's such in the shadow, but for me, I feel like it's such a, when used in the right, like, frequency and intention, it's such a powerful tool for people that are not working a program, that are normies, as you would say, of, like, helping people with transition. I'm never gonna say it's for everyone, but for me personally, it was a great gift in my life that helped me to stay connected to the frequency of my inner child and of joy when I was having a really hard time accessing that. It kind of helped just, like, pick me up enough to be like, take a step, like, you're gonna be okay, like, let's just meditate, let's just take a moment to check in with yourself, girl. Like, that's, like, the medicine that it, like, has really provided for me, like, during that time specifically.
Well, I love that you're sharing that now, but I am wondering, again, going back to the
Yeah.
perfectionism, like all these stigmas that I watched you really try to wrestle with and deal with the stigma of a divorce happening, the
Mhm.
stigma of smoking weed. Like, how did
Mhm.
you move through these things that you were so afraid to talk about at first?
Um, one by one,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like I remember like I did a interview called Motherhood and Marijuana
Mm-hmm.
for like some people that were also on our podcast as well. Unfolding sharp edges or
Sure.
sharp,
Yeah.
sharp I think it's unfolding sharp corners. I forget the exact name, but they asked me like what topic was like kind of the most,
Taboo.
yeah, for me at that point, and that's what it was. And like, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's like my family and certain members were talking. I still feel like there's a lot of people who want to put certain things in a category, even though I live in California, in a place where I could just as easily buy a beer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's still such a stigma around it. And we did an episode that I love, that episode that we did around psychedelics
Mm-hmm.
and around marijuana, and like how all the, or cannabis, right? Because I think even that name has like a reason behind it. But I love really diving into all of these stigmas that were placed on these plants and on these medicines. And for me, it's like, how many people, and it's totally fine. I have nothing against people that choose to use antidepressants or things like that. You do what works for you. But we have to look at like, there are some people that, like me included, that are going to choose to use a plant, and that's going to work better for my body versus a pharmaceutical. But I feel like so often we're normalizing one because it comes in the form of a pill, and I just do not wish to subscribe to that anymore. And of course there's going to be people that disagree. No one's ever going to agree on anything, but i I'm totally fine like now, because I've realized typically the people that, there's going to be plenty of people that are for me, that are my people, and the ones that aren't, they're not my people. And I've really had to just come to accept that.
Well, do you also agree that it's really heightened for a woman, especially because I know that as you went through your process, like there was a lot of anger that came up with like the patriarchy, and especially like a woman, a mom, a single mom smoking weed versus like a dad smoking weed. So
I
how do
don't
you like
know.
make?
I don't know. I mean, I know what you're talking about that, those like energies in my life, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I really felt that that was like a specific thing related to being a mom, unless there's something that I'm not remembering.
Oh, girl, there was like a long patch of like fuck the patriarchy because
Oh, I mean, I definitely feel like I went through that patch, but I think the anger at that point for me was feeling like I was really trying to get a lot of help and support at that point. And because I was like this mom that had not worked as much, and I didn't have as much income to show in those recent years, because like for me it's like my business was getting going, and then it was like, oh, there's a baby, here's a maternity leave, let's get things going, oh, here's another baby, let's say, like, so I really felt like that was not my biggest money making time. And so I felt so much anger that I was going out there trying to apply for these loans, and that they were basically saying that my income didn't meet it. And I'm just thinking, I'm like, how the fuck am I supposed to do this? Like, it just really felt like, it felt as though the systems that were like set up, or things that maybe somebody, usually it would be the dad that would be continuing to earn income, it just felt like financially I felt like at such a deficit. And I felt like all of these programs or these things that you would think, okay, I can lean on these, were just not really set up for a mom who had taken a step back, you know? And I mean, imagine if I took a full step back like many women do, and I understand why that's a valid choice. But I think at one point the anger also started to kind of like, sometimes anger does get you moving, and I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a good fuel in the beginning. It's just not a sustainable one. But I do feel like at one point I was just like, fucking fuck, I'm gonna like, I'm gonna make this money, like I'm gonna create these things. Like I also felt like the kind of business that I had, like I had this like very different kind of business that was very away from the mainstream. So I also felt like I was feeling angry that like there was things that were happening that were kind of kicking me out of pathways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that, like I got kicked off of Stripe processing for being a fortune telling service when, of course, like I did these business readings and things like that. But I mean, I think my business was more than that, and they were like, "No, this is our policy." And like I remember, I had it connected to a membership site, and I had to move all of my content. I had worked so hard,
I
and
remember.
yeah, and so I think that was really what the anger was. But then at some point, like just like everything else, I had to be like, "Look, things are what they are, and like this is existing within me at this point, and all the ways that I feel." Like, oh, judged by the patriarchy or by religious institutions or this or that. I had to like realize that in this moment, that's all within me, and that I might have been subjected to certain things, and maybe that wasn't my choice, but it's in me now. And the only way that I can shift it or change it or have any power over myself and my actions was to focus on changing it within me and realizing that I had it, that I was afraid of it, or maybe there was parts of me that was judging it and didn't like it. So that's really, I think, when things started shifting, and that was definitely shortly after I left my marriage. And I think my healing kind of, it was on a more, like on steroids, probably after the divorce.
It was
by
definitely
necessity.
accelerated for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And this brings me to something that I always find very interesting with you as a recovering perfectionist,
Uh-huh.
like criticism. I know that in the past you've had encounters with some criticism. If you want to share those stories, awesome. About
Yeah.
like people messaging you and not having kind things to say and it really emotionally affecting you.
Mm-hmm.
And you work with a lot of business owners that
Oh,
might
yeah.
encounter that, and do if you want to share those stories and like how you did get through it, because it used to hit you like a ton of bricks. And
Oh,
now,
yeah. I mean, I remember like it did not take that much, like probably at the first few years. Like I remember calling you crying for like some kind of email, and like I do feel like in some ways I'm still sensitive. I feel like sometimes like being very open, loving souls, like I don't necessarily want to be fully shut down. I want to feel, but at the same time, I felt really sensitive and put so much value on anything negative. A good example was, do you remember that one video that like first went viral on TikTok where I was basically saying that people that are on the spectrum also have other benefits to being on the spectrum, like spiritual abilities and maybe psychic abilities, that many healers are on the spectrum,
didn't
right?
you get stitched on that one?
Yes, like so I remember I saw somebody making a video that was kind of similar, and I remember I was like, what are her comments say? Because I feel like I remember like feeling very, based on this person who basically stitched me and then basically was like saying how much of a piece of shit I was, because in my 60-second video how I was just completely not seeing like her experience of being on the spectrum. Meanwhile, I'm just like, okay, I am on the spectrum, my child is on the spectrum, like I am speaking from my experience. You get to have your experience, I get to have mine, and we get to have different experiences. And so but the thing is I remember that was like, it really did rock my world, because for the few people out there that were having negative things to say. And so it's interesting because I went back to the video yesterday, I looked at those comments, and of the 500 comments, like honestly I was like trying to look for the bad one. I was looking for the bad comments and I could not find them
Because it was overwhelmingly
it was
supportive
overwhelmingly
and good,
positive,
right?
and people are like, oh my gosh. People are like, where did you get that wallpaper? And there was a lot of that, which I know you told me not to get it. And everyone
Call
loved
me
it.
out. All right. Sometimes I can be wrong.
But I feel like, yeah, it was like overwhelmingly positive. And so the thing is I realize now how much I was like really focusing on that negative and how much I allowed that to affect me. I also know that I really, which I don't think was necessarily a wrong choice for me, but like when I really first got divorced, I started to pull away from social media. I think I kind of tried to maintain it, but then there was like a lot of, if I'm doing readings online, there's a lot of, things that was like, Jesus is king, like repent and live and that kind of stuff. And I remember I was so sensitive at that point. I was so like open and raw, and I felt like every like little thing I could feel, and that was one of the reasons, like, cuz I think I always have been somebody that has put a lot online through joy, but I felt like I really had to pull it back a lot cuz I just didn't have like the strength or the desire to like really open my life up to people at that point.
Well, let's talk a little bit about those because, this is a spiritual conversation, spiritual podcast, like
Mm-hmm.
moving through that current of people that just want to come on and bash spiritual creators or healers and those comments and those nonstop, like, this is evil and like this is of Satan and stuff like that. How do you now find the humor to move through those things?
I feel like I think depending on the day, I kind of deal with it in different ways. Like sometimes I do get kind of playful with it. Sometimes I get really honest too. And there's like you've seen before, like I think sometimes like if I'm honestly feeling something in a moment, like I feel like sometimes people will just like they're used to just being ignored fully, that there's times when I have basically just said my view on it, or I've said like your words, I was like that like hurts. I remember having like a breakdown on one of my post divorce episodes, and like basically like kind of like starting to cry and being like, I'm a person that's showing up today to share my light, and to like I'm a woman that's just moved to this new apartment that's going through a divorce with two small children, and I want you to feel the impact of your words, and I want you to really think about what Jesus was about. And I want you to like, yeah, and I'm like, I'm good with Jesus. Like, and I feel like, of course there's other people who might say things about me being, if anything spiritual, there might be people telling you that you're crazy or delusional or this or that. But like, I feel like I'm solid in my understanding and in my experience, and I'm never going to say that my way or my experience is right for everybody, but I feel like I'm not trying to source that validation from the outside anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like what I like to say is that darkness, like the going through those really dark, really hard hours, you realize how precious joy is and love and connection is in your life. So I like to say that I really did find that light within myself walking through the darkness. I feel like I don't really want to like let that win in my life. Like I've experienced enough of that.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because people that tend to be healers or very sensitive to other people's energies and be like empaths, I know that's thrown around a lot, tend to end up picking these relationships where they're like healing like baby birds all the time and trying to cradle everyone. I know like you went through your
Mm-hmm.
own string of that, and now like to see you like in a healthy, beautiful relationship, like what how did you travel through that? Because you and I would both like pick the ones that are wounded or we could save. And on a personal note, like how did you get through that frequency of trying to be the rescuer or codependency? Because I think
Mm-hmm.
everyone in this community deals with that in some form.
Yeah. And I remember like my first spiritual teacher saying like if you're going into the healing profession, like really look at your codependency. Otherwise you're going to have codependency with your clients. And I didn't understand it. Like at that point I felt like I wasn't ready to like really receive that part of my
Mm-hmm.
learning, but I feel like I think most of the relationships that we're exposed to growing up usually have a lot of codependency, even the things that we probably see in like TVs and movies, it's like kind of normalized. But the way that we do one thing, we do everything. And so I did find that there was like a lot of interesting codependent kinds of things that I think both of us were attracting in my business as well as, yes, like in my relationships as well. And I feel like therapy was a really big help for me because I felt like I needed somebody to like help me unpack these specifics in my relationship, and to like, you know what I mean? Like some have, I don't know if there's ever terms that you've had where people throw it around, but it takes a while for it to fully land and for you to see how it's showing up in your life. And so for me, I remember my therapist said, okay, so imagine if like two people are holding a rope, right? And the rope is like the relationship. Codependency is basically saying, like, it doesn't matter how either of us as individuals are, this rope, this relationship, we cannot let go no matter what, no matter if this is like to our detriment as
Mm-hmm.
individuals. And like, and so I feel like that's like, absolutely. I think a lot of healers do it in trying to kind of fix or solve things with clients. And I feel like they also feel like it's their responsibility to like heal them initially. And I feel like that energy shows up like that, right? And I think I probably had some of that in the beginning as well, I'll admit, as well as like, I think like just kind of chipping off parts of ourself, like in all of our different kinds of relationships, in order to be a fit for someone, in order for us to fit together better, more smoothly. It was like, I used to operate from who do I need to be to make this work, and I was a very good chameleon, you know.
Okay. So, what would you consider? Because I know a lot of this is about like the dark night of the soul. Like, what is like your pinnacle moment that you
Hmm.
really like felt that dark night of the soul, that really like deep place where it was like almost like fully in shadow, even though shadow can be a
Hmm.
good thing. Like, what do you consider your dark night of the soul, and how did you push through it?
I would say that it was really the first year after my divorce, and I feel like that was a very, very long year
Mm-hmm.
because I remember like like the moment that comes to mind for me, like, because it was a very specific date, like, I was really struggling to pay my rent to live here, and there would be months where I was fine and the clients would be there, and then other moments where I like couldn't cut it, where it would be the 17th of the month and I haven't paid my rent
Mm-hmm.
yet. And I remember it was hitting me really hard when it was around Christmas, because I remember there was that December I was on your couch as well, like just really in a like a puddle around this, because it's right before Christmas, and I it's December 17th. I haven't paid my rent, and I in other moments where I was short, I was like really finding ways to solve it, right? But basically I felt like at that point I had to surrender. I had to like talk to family and say I don't know what to do. Like I'm really trying here. I need help. And honestly, for me, asking for help meant that I like failed. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I saw that, for me, I like really was trying to not need help, or to I think I had a lot of fears around letting help in, because I felt like people were going to try to exercise some control or opinion over what I was doing. And for me, it did feel really important to like make my own choices. I had just gotten out of a marriage where I felt like I wasn't getting to make my own choices. And I was like, I'm going to do this in my way. And even like moving here, getting this place, staying in my business versus going to get a job, there's a lot of people that were trying to pull me in a different direction that I wasn't choosing. And that, you know what I mean? Like, that caused a lot of tension within family. But that was hard. I feel like that was like some of the moments where I feel like I cracked. I also felt like I was like, Craig and I were together at that point, but like I basically was trying to hold things together so much and not even share that it's halfway through the month and I got a notice on my door. That was my partner, and I wasn't sharing that with him because for me, I felt like I was worthless. If I That was when I really realized how much worth I was putting on the numbers that were in my
Mm-hmm.
bank account, because I like that was in my shadow. I was this woman who was like a business coach, who was like, I mean, for the 20 hours and the like, I felt like I was doing well for where I was at. And like I felt like I didn't realize how much, if my bank account emptied, how much all of my
Self
worth
worth.
and, yeah, my how I perceive my value would go with it. And so that was another part where it cracked, where he was finally like, he's so intuitive with me, and he was like, what is going on with you? Like, what is happening? And I feel like a lot of people that I'd been in my life, they weren't really like noticing me on that level. And I remember, I think I just started crying because that was the moment when I thought I was going to get an SBA loan for $16,000 and it was supposed to fund the next day. And then I got an email the day before that it was not going through. And I had tried so many different ways and sources. And I was like, finally, this is going to be something that can give me a boost so I can invest in myself and my business. And then they're like, sorry, this criteria you didn't meet, or blah, blah, just like an email, and they wouldn't really tell you specifically. And I was like trying to not tell Craig because I was like, what is he gonna think of me? Like, I'm this like single mom, like, that is like failing financially, and I'm also like, I don't want to put this on him. Like, this is not for his to deal with. And like, I remember he was just like, I was just bawling. I was just ugly crying. We were at this, like, of all places, in getting dental work done for him near Mexico. So we were in this jacked, crazy hotel room. It was like such a crazy time. I'll always remember it. And it was like such a shithole. And I remember him holding me. He's like, I need you to hear me right now. He's like, you do not deserve this place. I don't want you to have any story or narrative around this, but you're better than this, okay? I'm like, so I feel like he really marked that moment. But I had to, like, basically bring it all out and tell him what was actually going on with my finances. And he's like, Ashley, he's like, you can't live on an island. He's like, you've isolated yourself so far out here. And I think with you as well, you were my best friend. And I don't even think I really was sharing a lot with you at that time, was I?
I mean, no. And I think that's something really beautiful for you to maybe talk about, because I think it does leak back to like that perfectionism and
yes.
Like, and really, because you would just give hints of it. You would just give hints of what you're going through, but not.
Well,
elaborate.
I have a tendency to like talk around things or globally about stuff, and I feel like I've really tried to practice like talking directly about it and just being like, I don't know. I guess I just have no fucks left to give.
All right, so I want you to look in that camera.
Okay.
And to the person in that same situation, I want you to give the advice that you would have wanted or needed at that time. All right?
Okay, so are they in their marriage still? Have they left?
They're balls deep in that marriage still. Okay? You get in there and you tell them.
I need you to listen to me and just stop what you're doing and just give yourself this moment. I want you to take a nice deep breath in and release the day, release anything else that's not this moment, and just like really ask yourself what you want, what you see for your life, like what you feel like you deserve, and like what you really know in your heart of hearts. Because I know that if you're at this point where you're already questioning, and you're probably going on years now of talking to your friends about how you don't know if you're in the right relationship, and like, I just want you to know that it is going to be very difficult. It's going to be very hard. I don't want to lie to you. I don't want to sugarcoat it, but I will say that even in the hardest moments where I was like sobbing on the floor, crying, just like, you know, scared out of my wits about how I was going to take care of my family or pull it all together, I never, ever, ever regretted it. And I, of course, explored what there was to explore, did the marriage therapy, made sure that there was really no stone unturned. So do that work, but like, don't avoid doing that work. Don't avoid the hard conversations. Don't avoid the pain, and just settle for the uncomfortable discomfort that you're just used to, because you deserve more than that. And on the other side of that really scary leap, when you choose you and when you just take steps for you and believe in yourself and invest in yourself and pour into yourself and just keep making that choice again and again each day, it is a beautiful fucking life that is worth fighting for and worth leaping for. Thank you.
One more question.
Okay.
Because, you know, people embodying their sexuality is like one of my favorite topics, and I think that we get like so itchy around it, and like one of the last podcasts I did, I was talking about this, so we get so like afraid to talk about sexuality.
I'm gonna get my pussy up here too while we're at it.
Over the last few years, you have really stepped into like owning more of your sexuality and your sexual being. So, what would be your first recommendation for any woman, man, trans individual that's really having a hard time connecting to their sexual being?
Yeah.
Like, what would be a great starting ground?
I would say, like, step one, like, probably watch, like, Sex, Love, and Goop on Netflix, because I do feel like that really kind of opens the door to a lot of different, like, teachers and mentors and things like that, like, on that topic. And I also feel like finding a mentor like Crystal, for example, somebody who does erotic blueprint work. I feel like there's also a lot of great men's coaches that I know that are out there like that are working with divine masculine. But I feel like for me, like I really needed to find and wanted to find a mentor that was like really comfortable with that energy. As a friend, I feel like you've always also been very encouraging for me there in that healing. But like having the investment and the sessions and having like a mentor that I worked with like really pushed me out of my comfort zone. And I remember realizing like how like unhealed I was and how much I shut down like when I first stepped into my relationship, right? Like I have a beautiful partner that I've been with for over 2 years, and like I realized like how connected we were, but then like I realized that I just felt like I turned into this like little girl when it came to the bedroom initially, because I felt like I was just so shut down, so scared, so like lacking confidence, and it was almost as if different confident parts of me disappeared and like kind of went back in like age or something. Like it sounds weird, but I'm sure it's common, right? And so I felt like I recognized that, and I was like, wow, why do I shrink in this area? I'm choosing to take up space. So I did really invest in that part of my life. And I think that Sex, Love, and Goop show, I think it kind of opens up the energies. And then I think from there, like you'll kind of like, I'm all about like, you know, just finding people in your network or calling in, asking people to be connected with you that are going to be like the right teachers or mentors for you. Cause that was huge for me.
All right. Final question.
Okay.
Let's see if you've learned anything over these last 3 years. Okay. Because I asked you this question 3 years ago.
No.
Okay. You're a big, big advocate for the queer community.
I don't know. I don't like being put on the spot.
Ashley, who's one of your favorite queer actors?
RuPaul.
I think you just said RuPaul because you definitely know they're queer.
Yeah.
And the last time I asked this question, you said Hugh Grant.
Yes. Well, can we talk about like musicians or other categories?
Sure.
Chapel Roan. I love Chapel Roan right now. I'm trying to think who else. Lady Gaga's probably queer in some way. She's got some kind of kick.
Any last piece of advice for anyone really trying to step onto their path?
I would say that I'm like very much about frequency first, and it's not like I feel like we can skip over like doing the work or like taking the steps. But I think that I am really huge about like doing things and utilizing your body to like use your getting ready process or use your movement to really like experience and feel that version of you. Like I feel like that for me like is what carried me forward and got me here. Even in the years like before I got divorced, I feel like I was like I'm sure you remember some of those moments when I had like my turquoise lipstick on in my garage and I was like channeling live for the first time. I felt like I was like, it felt like a really foreign version to me, but I realized I was essentially like channeling the energy of like this version of me. And that kind of pulled me forward. And I feel like rather than just like hoping that we're going to be comfortable and like fully expressed on social media, it's like really take time to like nurture that within yourself and get that into your body and then show up to what you're creating, because I think it makes such a big difference when we really like nurture that and get intentional with our frequency first.
Well, I love you so much.
I love you so much.
Thank you for asking me to have this talk with you. I always love.
Thank you. It wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be.
I know, you were shitting bricks for a minute.
I was thinking maybe we just delay this.
But I love you, and I'm so proud to be on this journey with you.
Oh, thank you.
And you gotta learn who some gay actors are, okay?
Well, maybe if I
That's
had
all
a gay
for now.
best friend.
Thank you.